We are with Christopher Black, um, the lawyer who is now being hunted by the Rwandan government and being demanded to be arrested by Canada, along with a few others, Joy Reaver, Phil Potts, and Rwandan Canadians who have unduly taken advantage of their second citizenship status.
Hmm.
It's
Right.
yes. Um, now, Christopher Black, I think we should just start from the very beginning. So, Dr. Bizimana, he's accused you of genocide now, essentially, and has called for maybe Canada to update their laws so that you can be prosecuted for that.
Hmm.
Let's start with the work that got you in trouble with them in the first place. Basically, your representation of General Ndindiliyimana.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, basically, what the RPF regime is angry about is the fact that, like a number of other people, lawyers and analysts who observed the trials at the ICTR, the Rwanda Tribunal, they're angry that we fought those trials and revealed a lot of the truth about the war in Rwanda to the world. And we tell the world what the evidence was in that trial. So it's very bizarre because we were guaranteed complete immunity and protection by the UN and by the ICTR when we took these jobs, assignments. And we're still ostensibly guaranteed to be protected by the witness and the counsel section and so on for doing our job. And all we're doing is talking about the job we did and what the trials revealed and what the evidence was. Nothing I'm saying is my opinion. All I'm saying is what we found out in the trials and what the evidence was, even from the prosecution. They don't like that because it doesn't accord with their narrative about that war, and they want to suppress it at all costs. And they began that they tried to do that from the very beginning with many of the lawyers who worked at the tribunal. There's an array of lawyers there. Well, divide them into three groups, basically. Those who really wanted to fight for the prisoners, all the Hutu prisoners. Those who just were in it for the game and didn't really understand what was going on and tried their best in a way, but weren't political, so never got the right picture of things. And there were those, quite a few of them, who were just direct agents of the Western interests and went in to try and get the clients to plead guilty or otherwise sabotage their defense so they weren't properly defended. And the prisoners had a list of all those counsel. They trusted and those they didn't. So I got involved in 2000, and I got involved basically through John Philpott, and we met during the NATO war in Yugoslavia, and we were all angry about NATO's role in attacking Yugoslavia, and we worked together on something with Philpott, Michael Mandel, David Jacobs, myself, and some others. And I won't go into all the details of what we tried to do to protest that, but it failed. Anyway, we met each other and became acquainted. And about a year later, he phoned me and said, you should get involved with the ICTR. And I wasn't interested because I was a Toronto criminal lawyer and I had legal aid practice, basically, doing gamut of criminal cases from petty thefts up to murders. I did a lot of jury trial work. And legal aid was starting to be cut back, so it was very difficult to make a living, and I had to practice on my own. I didn't want to thought of going to Africa and leaving all that, who knows what. I was like, I don't think so. So for a few months I declined. I said, I'm not really interested in doing that. But anyway, he insisted, and then he one day phoned me and said, as a general's just been arrested. He's one of the most important fish they've got, and you should defend this man. He needs a lawyer, because he was already defending his client there. And I hesitated, but then I got a letter from General Ndindiliyimana requesting me to be his lawyer. That intrigued me. It was quite eloquent, and I was impressed by this letter. It was a very eloquent, a sophisticated letter. So, okay, this is now intriguing me because I didn't know anything about the war in Rwanda except what I read in the Western press, which was all you saw at the time it happened. I remember the press coverage vividly, 1994 through 99. It was just the Western press portrayed it as two African tribes savagely attacking each other without any rhyme or reason, and no context given, no explanation. And that's just the way it is in Africa. So I didn't really pay that much attention. I didn't have any clue as to what was really going on geostrategically. Anyway, so I talked to him on the phone. I was allowed to talk to him on the phone, and then he only spoke French. My French was not so great at that time. And he asked me to sign up and asked to come and see him, which I did. And I finally got on the list. That took me a few weeks to get on the council list there. They make you jump through hoops to do that. Anyway, after a long delay, including when I made an application to be his lawyer and he made a request from his side, I made a request from my side. They tried to stop me from coming in. They phoned me one morning and spoke in fluent French very rapidly, and I didn't understand. I just woke up, I didn't understand what they were saying. And then they told him, they hung up and then told him that day that I can't be his lawyer because I can't speak French. He said, I don't care if he speaks Chinese, I want this guy. So they had to back down, but they play games like that. Anyway, I finally got approval, and then they had to pay my way down there. So I went over to see him to Arusha for a week in Tanzania, where the ICTR is located. And I went in to see him, and I didn't know what to expect, and I was very impressed by General Ndindiliyimana even when he entered the room. He is a very distinguished man, a very wise man, very intelligent, and quite an impressive figure. He's quite an intellect, and he's got a lot of courage. And he's very like most of the Rwandan officers I met, were very proper, very formal, very correct. True military officers, in my view, because I was in the army at one time. Anyway, he sat down and he introduced himself, I introduced myself, and then he said to me, can you keep an open mind? And I said, yeah, I think I can. He said, okay, I'm going to tell, if you've got the patience, I'm going to tell you what happened in the war, day by day, from start to finish, from October 1st, 1990, when the war began, till the end. And I'm going to tell you exactly what happened each day, what action happened, what counteraction happened, and everything that developed. And I think then you'll understand what happened in this war. And then you'll understand why they've got me here, and why the other prisoners are here, and why we're here. So he did. Over 3 days, he told me everything. And suddenly it all just made complete logical sense. It was just clear as a bell what happened. And it was like night and day, just like because I was then defending also, I just began defending President Milosevic, and I was involved in the ICTY. I knew it was all nonsense what they were saying, all these stories and charges. But I wasn't sure about the ICTR. But then I quite realized it was the same picture. It was run by the same people. Anyway, he spent 3 days telling me all that, and then he asked me if I wanted to represent him. And I said, well, it's really intriguing. I'm very interested. He's very convincing and compelling. But I said, I'm not sure my French is good enough to represent you, because he speaks fluent French, and my French was rude. I had high school French. I thought it was better than that, but when I was listening to him, he had to repeat himself many times. And I said, I'm not sure I'm the right guy for you. He said, no, look, you can learn French. You can get your French improved. You can work at night and improve your French. Meanwhile, I like your attitude, and I'd like to have you. I said, okay, if you know my limitations, I'm willing to learn more French. He said, you do that. So we shook hands, and I agreed to represent him. The next day I went to the tribunal, and was just walking around the building. There's like 1,000 people. That was built by the Chinese, the complex there, years ago. And they had many floors in this complex. Over 1,000 people. I was just wandering around, checking the hallways, looking. And I was walked up to a very tall woman walked up to me, quite attractive, an American woman. and said, "Are you Mr. Black?" Yes. Are you defending General Ndindiliyimana? Yes. I said, "Well, who are you?" She says, "I'm Colonel Patricia Wildemut." I said, "Well, Colonel, what kind of colonel are you?" She said, "I'm a U.S. Air Force colonel. I'm also a JAG officer, a lawyer." So, well, what's an American Air Force colonel doing in this tribunal? You people said you had nothing to do with Rwanda. She says, "Well, that's a long story." So she says, "I'm actually in charge of all the prosecutions here." So the American Air Force was in charge of all the prosecutions at that point. I said, "Okay, so what would you like?" She said, "Well, can we meet tomorrow? I'd like to talk about your case." So I said, "Okay, sure." And went back and told him. He gave me permission. So I went and met them, and I went to this room the next day, expecting to meet with one or two people, but I sat in there. They put me in a long room with a long board table. Then about 25 people walked in the room. Lawyers and assistants and researchers and investigators and police. And her and a lawyer I used to know in Canada who's now working for them. Won't mention his name now. Anyway, it was quite clear they did that to intimidate me right from the get-go, because I was sitting there by myself. And they began to browbeat me and say, "Okay, Mr. Black, but we got the goods on your client. We got 200,000 pages of documents. We got him coming and going. His men committed massacres. He supported this, and he was like that and that. And so what we want to propose to you, if you plead him guilty while you're down here, we could give him 15, 20 years instead of life. And how about that?" I said, "Well, I'm not pleading my client guilty to anything. I haven't seen any evidence against him. And I find it very strange that if your case is so strong, why are you trying to get me to plead guilty the first day I'm here? I haven't seen any evidence that he's guilty of anything. He's told me what happened. It doesn't accord with what you say." "Well, look, I mean, okay, you fight for your client, Mr. Black. That's good. We respect that. But, okay, let's go. We're going to make it, maybe make it 10 years. If he pleads guilty and testifies against Colonel Bagasora." I says, no. Look, I'll tell you what. As a lawyer, I'll go back and tell him the offer you made, but I'm going to tell him, if I recommend it, I'm going to tell him, no, I do not recommend that. But I'll pass the message on. They weren't happy. They were very angry. They thought I would collapse. I just said, no, I'm not. Till I see some evidence, I'm not pleading guilty to anything. So that broke up, and I went and told him, and he said, yeah, they've been doing that since they came here. And then it turns out that he was tricked when he first came here. He was told some of their investigators went to Belgium, told his then lawyer in Belgium that they wanted to interview him in Arusha, not charge him, and would he go there to be interviewed. So they didn't even oppose the extradition or the trip down to Arusha, thinking it was something innocent. But when he got there, he was suddenly thrown in jail. And he never saw it. He wasn't even charged. There was no charge, not for a couple of months. He didn't see a charge, no indictment, and so on. And he was kept isolated for a while. And they're done with a number of prisoners. Anyway, so he was never properly charged. And he was tricked into being there, because otherwise they could have fought the extradition in Belgium for a while, which is where he was living at the time with his family. And by the way, his wife is a Tutsi, so his children are mixed Hutu Tutsi. So there's all this skullduggery going on. Anyway, we finally agreed to work together. I went back to Canada. Then I came back a month later, and when I came back, I went to the jail to see him, the prison, and he wasn't there. I went in and asked the UN staff, "I want to see my client." They said, "He's not here." I said, "Well, where is my client?" They said, "We can't tell you." "What do you mean you can't tell me where your prisoner is? Where's my client?" "We're not going to tell you." "Oh, now you're holding him incommunicado somewhere." Anyway, I made a big stink. I went and saw people. I spoke to the press. I made a big stink for 2 days. They wouldn't tell me where he was. Finally, they agreed to tell me he's in a safe house and that he'd been put there because he was threatened by the other prisoners, which was a lie. They put him in there with a Belgian reporter who they convicted. I forget his name now. Anyway, they did it to isolate him, to work on him psychologically. and to make him look like he was, to the other prisoners, like he was going to talk to them. It was all, they played these psychological games. So I finally got to meet him in the safe house where they'd placed him. He said, I want out of here. I know what they're trying to do to me. So I spent several days talking to the press because that was the only way they reacted if it came out in the press. So some friendly journalist printed a story about what they were doing, and they felt embarrassed by it. So they sent him back into the main population, back into the prison, where he was elected head of the prisoners committee by all the prisoners. So he wasn't in danger from the prisoners. You have to know that these prisoners, all the Hutu prisoners, those all men and one woman, Pauline, acted as if they were prisoners of war. So they formed a general prison committee in which they had a political subcommittee, a music committee, a church committee, investigative committee, education committee, military committee, analysis committee. They arranged themselves very well. And they were all organized, and they all had assignments. They were all busy all the time. I've never seen such a thing before. The prisoners of the ICTY never did anything like that. They weren't allowed to. But anyway, they regarded themselves as prisoners of war, and they wrote to the UN back in 2007 that they were political prisoners of the UN. Anyway, so my first year there was going back and forth every couple of months for a few weeks. During that time, they tried to plant people on me. I tried to plant girls on me who were going to be spies on me. They tried to intimidate me. I got very sick once, but I can tell you lots of stories. But anyway, the whole sequence of events is a bit vague sometimes. I didn't keep a diary. Anyway, over time, so this trial he was arrested in 2000. I started in 2000. There was no actual trial until 2004, 4 years. But during that 4-year period, they gave us an indictment which was blacked out. So we never did know the actual charges full charges. You couldn't read the indictment. And it had lots of co-accused, but you couldn't read the names. So he's charged with X, 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 and Y. We don't know who they are. We're doing X, Y, Z. We couldn't even read what it said. So it's not a real indictment. And we had to guess what the charges were just from reading in between the lines. And we complained about that, but we still never got a proper indictment. The judges didn't insist on the prosecution giving us one. So we had to guess what the charges were, just from the drift of what they were saying. And then they fed us, I got maybe 150,000 pages of documents, mainly in French, on discs and so on, and sometimes hard copy, about cases which had nothing to do with his. And I had to go read this stuff because I wasn't sure, but when I was reading, I realized it had nothing to do with his case. And over a year, I realized that they were just snowing me, wasting my time with irrelevant stuff. It had nothing to do with him, just wasting my time. So I complained about that, and I got no real disclosure. He's giving me garbage, nothing related to him. It's just paper. You're papering me over like a mountain of paper, hoping I'm just going to get so bored and fed up. I'll go, because a lot of guys just quit. I got fed up and left. Anyway, we did the best we could, what we thought the charges were, and we had an investigator. I had an investigator there. First was a young lieutenant in the Gendarmerie. He was a very good guy. Eventually left us. But while I was there, I think in 2003, we got an investigator, Colonel Karangwa. He was also a gendarme. Was he a major in the army? No, a gendarme. And he agreed to be our lead investigator, and it was great because he knew a lot of people in the diaspora, in the Hutu and the Tutsi community. He knew lots of people we'd use as witnesses. And he knew everything that had happened in the war. He knew everything about the military command structure. He was great. He was a very sophisticated guy also. So he came down we got him approved. And he had been checked out by the Dutch police because he had applied to the Dutch police. He's living in Holland. He had applied to them to be a policeman, and they had vetted him. They found he had not been charged by the RPF with anything. He was clear, so they approved him for that tentatively. Meanwhile, he came down to work for us. The UN approved him. They also said there's nothing against him. Anyway, he gets there 2 days after we arrived, and we met each other. And we're planning what we're going to do for the trial. One of the administrators called me in and told me, he closed the door and he said, "Chris, you got to get Karangwa out of here." I said, "Why do I need to do that? He just got here." He said, "They're going to arrest him. If he doesn't leave soon, they're going to arrest him." I said, "No." Now in my head, I'm thinking, "What, is he telling me I got to get rid of the guy because he's not going to really arrest him? They just want me to get rid of him. They don't want him here helping me. Or they really are going to arrest him, but what do I do now?" Anyway, I had to tell him that you might be arrested. So he said, "You got to get me. If they arrest me, I'm going to disappear. I won't live long." So I trusted the administrator. He was a friendly guy, and I think they were serious. They brought him down and they were going to arrest him. And then that would deprive me of my lead investigator, and he would be in trouble, deep trouble for a long time, maybe permanently. Anyway, so we had to make a decision. So we decided to get him out of the country. So I had to spend a lot of my own money to sneak him out underground, because he couldn't fly out on known flights because they could stop him and pick him up. So we had to arrange an underground trip to get him out of the country, to get back to Europe. That was very complicated. And then we lost our lead investigator. Took me a while to get somebody else, a couple of years to get. We had some people in between who weren't that great. We got the best we could, but some people didn't have the motivation or didn't know the context. So by doing that to me, they sabotaged this case really, really strongly. And also during that period, I got malaria very badly. But one day I went to a restaurant with several lawyers, and we all ate from the same dishes. But I had different soup. Anyway, 6 hours later, I was in the hospital in shock. And the doctors told me that I'd been poisoned. And they said, "Lucky you got here quick enough, otherwise you wouldn't last long." So I was in there for a couple of days. That was really bad. Anyway, then I went home and tried to recover. Then I was engaged in a Milosevic affair quite heavily. Then where did I go next? 2004. Because the trial starts in 2004, but just before the trial starts, I get a letter from the administration people in charge of the lawyers section and telling me that I've been paid too much money over the last 3 years I've been working there. Now each bill we sent in had to be approved, so I was allowed so many hours per month at a certain rate, and you had to send it in and justify everything you did, and they automatically cut it by a third usually, no matter what you did. And anyway, they approved the bills I sent in minus the 1/3, and sometimes they refused to pay for different things. Anyway, so they wrote me a letter saying, "We paid you too much. We're going to claw back all the money we paid you. You want to push me out because I actually do the work for my client. These guys haven't done anything for their clients in 3 years, but you're going to let them stay. This is what you want as lawyers, people that do nothing." "Oh, no. Anyway, they finally let me stay. They finally backed down. It was a tense meeting. And so the trial begins, and the very first day of the trial, they dump on us a brand new indictment. They walk in and say, "We have a new indictment because there were 4 prisoners besides, there was General Ndindiliyimana, Chief of Staff of the Gendarmerie. There's General Bizimungu, who was the Chief of Staff of the Army, a very fine man and a very fine officer. Captain Sagahutu, who was the commander of the armored squadron, and Captain Zwanyemeye, who's the commander of the Recce Battalion. And they all had different lawyers, of course. So they just dumped on us a whole new indictment against everybody. So we ranted and raved. What the hell you can't do this in a major trial like this. We're suddenly faced with now 45 new charges we'd never heard of. Massacres here. The gendarmes have massacred people there, We said, okay, now we want a delay because we have to prepare a defense for this because these new charges. You just delayed the trial. What are you trying to do? And they said, no, it's not going to be any delay. The trial's going on now. We said, we can't defend these men when we have no idea. We just found out what the real charges are. And we prepared a defense for different charges. Now you're telling us you're charging them with this. Too bad. Too bad, Mr. Black, everybody else. Carry on. So we had to scramble all the way through the trial for the next 5 years. While we were in the trial, trying to build up a defense, find witnesses, try and find staff and investigators. I didn't have a co-counsel at that point, by myself. And try and arrange a defense, cobble together a defense and find witnesses and on the run, really. They made it really difficult. And then anyway, the trial went on and on. It's very dramatic. And then we found out that the just to give you a sort of the character of these trials, something that the world should know, I think, is that in none of the trials at the Rwanda Tribunal that I'm aware of, and I'm aware of all of them, I think, never was there presented to the court or this tribunal, the judges at the tribunal, any concrete evidence of anybody being killed anywhere. There was never presented any photographs of bodies. There were never presented any videos of villages or towns or places where so-called massacres had taken place. There was no forensic evidence provided. There was no evidence of dead bodies at all. And yet we knew lots of people were being killed. That was obvious. But who they were is a question. So we stood up several times and said, where's the evidence of anything taking place? Well, it's common. Everybody knows what happened. Well, you may know what happened. You've got to prove what happened. Where is the evidence of a murder? Well, these mass murders, where is the bodies? Where are the victims? Where are the photographs? Where are the ID? Where is anything? They never showed us anything in all those years. I never have. All they did, I would say, the 95% of the witnesses they called again, well, I say 90%. The witnesses they called were Hutus who had been held in prison in Kigali and other places for years, tortured, starved to death, living 40 in a cell, beaten, threatened with death or longer terms in jail if they didn't come and testify the way they were told to do. And we found out that because, unlike most trials in the tribunal, I decided to start questioning the witnesses they brought in, how they came to the attention of the prosecution, where they came from, what the history was. And they tried to stop us from doing that, but so we're entitled to. So I asked a witness, how'd you come here? Who are you? Where'd you really come from? Because we just give them code names sometimes. We don't even know who they were. Some of them were brave enough to tell us, well, they just told us if we don't come and say this and this and this, they were going to kill us. Or they're going to kill my family. That was the character of almost all the witnesses. They were Hutu prisoners who had been intimidated, threatened, or with death or torture to come and give what they were told to give. And they made statements, and often, in fact, almost every time, the statements which they made 2 or 3 years before to the prosecutor never matched what they said in court. They couldn't keep the story straight because they was told to memorize these texts. And you know, somebody telling the truth never can be shaken up and always remembers the story because they saw it happen. They know what the story is. They saw it. They just tell it. But somebody who's had to memorize a script can't keep the story straight because they didn't see it happen. It's just being told to them. And that's what they had to.
So we know a lot of people were definitely killed in Rwanda, but like you said, no forensic evidence was ever presented. Do you think maybe the main reason for that is because the culprits were the one managing the prosecution?
Yeah, exactly. If they had shown, because we had, you know, Captain, who is it, Hakizimana, RPF officer, wrote to the UN. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but this is what he wrote to the UN, saying that in 12 weeks, the RPF killed 2 million Hutus. that most of the dead bodies were Hutus. There were Tutsis killed. Thousands of Tutsis were killed, but he said most of the dead were killed by us. There were Hutus, which we say are Tutsis. And yeah, I think if we had demanded proof of who those dead bodies were they claimed were killed and examined them, we would find out that there weren't. I'm sure that we would have found they were mostly Hutus. If you'd done genetic studies or something like that, I don't know. Or found out who their names were if they could be ID'd. Anyway, we never got that. And the rest of the witnesses were either experts, they brought in NATO, mainly NATO, military, Belgian, Canadian, American military experts, historians, and nobody from the RPF ever testified except a couple of people, which was surprising. The RPF said they saw the results of the massacres of the Rwandan army and the gendarmes and what the Interarmée did. Well, why weren't they brought in to give evidence about what they saw? None. No RPF officer testified. I mean,
so
yeah, they're the ones who said this is what happened.
Yeah, that's now. I just want to go back a little bit to when you were poisoned. Did you ever find out how you got poisoned?
They said
Because that was one of the ways that they tried to discourage you from doing this trial. So I was just wondering if you ever found out who was responsible for that.
No, not who was responsible, no. But the doctors said somebody had laced probably the soup I had with botulism. They said your count was up in the thousands. There's no way it could happen through food poison or accidentally be in the hundreds. Somebody actually deliberately laced you with botulism. And you hear there was a lot of scuttle about going around Irish lawyers and some other lawyers and other people who've been there longer than I had who were telling, two of the Canadian cops who worked there. There are two Canadian policemen who worked there, that Louise Arbour hired, who had been fired from the Montreal Police Department for corruption. And they'd been involved in a sort of tangential way in a murder. They were very sort of dirty guys. Anyway, they were hired. And it was generally spoken out loud in Arusha that they had killed people. That was the general belief among the lawyers and the prisoners. In fact, they were involved in 2005, 6-5. A former Rwandan cabinet minister named Ndindiliyimana, forgetting his first name now, Ndindiliyimana, who was living in Belgium, was contacted by the prosecution and asked to be a witness for the prosecution. And they were interviewing him, but they always took him to Lille, made him go to Lille in France for the interviews, and was with these two Canadian cops. He never was told why he had to go to Lille in France. Anyway, one day he got fed up with them, and he wrote a letter to the president of the tribunal, stating that these two Canadian police officers who work for the UN now were threatening to kill him and cut his body up into pieces and to kill his family unless he testified falsely against other prisoners at the Rwanda tribunal. And he said, I'm not going to do that. So he wrote to the president and told him, I'm no longer cooperating with you people. A week later, he disappeared. He left his house. His wife said, they said there was going to be one more final meeting, and he never came back from that meeting. 2 weeks later, his body was found in a canal in Brussels with his head cut off and his hands cut off. We got hold of the letter, and all the lawyers presented it in open court and said, this is the letter this man wrote just 2 weeks ago, saying he's being threatened with death and torture unless he testified falsely. He is now dead. So we want an investigation into who's behind this. Now, who was behind that? Were these two Canadian cops, and who were they working for? Who was in charge of that unit was Stephen Rapp. the American man who became the U.S. ambassador for war crimes. He floated in as being in charge of prosecutions around that time. So I stood up and demanded his arrest, a detention, because it doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to put 2 and 2 together. When you got a death threat, you got a guy alerting the president of a tribunal that I'm being threatened by these guys, and then I disappear, and he ends up the way he was described to end up. Well, you would think there'd be an investigation. There was no investigation whatsoever. Nothing was done, and it's been hushed up. The Belgian police never did an investigation. He was murdered and cut up, and nothing was ever done about it. That happened to a couple of other witnesses. Anyway, I was also being followed by the Tanzanian secret police. When I first got there, I was approached by a guy who pretended to be a journalist. A very friendly guy, Tanzanian guy, quite intelligent, talk about football, soccer and stuff. And anyway, he finally got in with me, and because he's friendly, and then I began to suspect he's after something. I didn't believe he was a journalist, and I never saw him with a notepad. Anyway, so then I found out, and he told me a couple of years later he was working for the Tanzanian secret police, and they were watching me, and they didn't know what to do with me. They didn't want me there. They wanted to get rid of me. And he said, we haven't hit you yet because we're not sure of who you really are. Some people think you're deep CIA. Have been sent in by somebody else. We don't know. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And they said, no, this is. So and then around the same time, 2003, 4, I can't remember exactly, there was a Scottish lawyer named Andrew McCartan who was representing a man there, and he was a Scottish lawyer. He was expert in military law in Scotland. I knew him vaguely, and then I heard that they tried to boot him out, accusing him of corruption and so on, and overbilling or something. Anyway, when I was in Toronto, he called me up one day and he said, I'm in Toronto and I want to meet with you if I can today, because I'm only here a couple of days. I said, well, it's just very important. So I went to meet him in a restaurant, and he was very nervous. He said he just came from New York, and he had been trying to see Bill Clinton because the Clintons were involved in Rwanda in a big way. The whole lie that the Clintons put out that the Americans did nothing in Rwanda is one of the biggest lies of all time. And he said, I found out lots of things, Chris. I found out lots of things, what's really going on at that tribunal about this war. I got stuff I'm going to send you. And he was very nervous. And I said, well, why do you come to see me? He says, because I know I'm worried. Something's up. I don't feel good. And I'm worried about my own safety. And I wanted you to know. I'm going to send you, I'm going to go back to Scotland. I'm going to send you the stuff. I just want you to know. Okay. 2 weeks later, he was dead. His car, the Scottish police said his car went off a cliff in Scotland, but there was no sign of drinking or skid marks or anything. So maybe it was an accident. Maybe he was forced off the road. I don't know, but he thought he was in jeopardy, and then he ends up dead. So anyway, a lot of these things are happening. They made threats against various members. They made threats against the general's family. They made threats to arrest his wife. A lot of things happen, take hours to go into. But in 2008, I was in a bar once, and this guy came up to me, and I knew him. He was a head administrator in the tribunal in charge of a big section, an American guy. And he asked if he could join me, and I said, okay. And he started talking to me, and he said, I'm going to tell you who I am. I said, why are you going to tell me? He says, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to know who I am. I said, okay. So he told me he'd been in the American Army intelligence in Iraq. He'd been then transferred to NATO headquarters in Brussels in intelligence. Then he'd been seconded to the CIA. And then he was transferred here as a member of the CIA, but working in his job as undercover, as his cover. So why'd you tell me all that? He says, because I want you to take me seriously when I tell you what I'm going to tell you. I said, what are you going to tell me? He says, If you don't back off what you're doing in the trial, we're going to kill you. Really crazy. So no, I'm going to, Chris, we're going to kill you if you don't back off. So I don't know how to react to that. I mean, is this guy, is just bluffing, or is he full of shit, or is he serious? Or if he was serious, just trying to intimidate me. But anyway, whatever. I said, okay, but suppose I don't. He says, well, look, we poisoned Milosevic. Yes, in 2008. We poisoned Milosevic, your buddy Milosevic. We poisoned him, and we poisoned Arafat. We can poison you. You won't ever know. We're just telling you. You got the message. I said, yeah, I got the message. And he got up and left. So I reported that in court next day. I reported that for my own safety to try and make it public. I said, this is what happened. They all laughed at me, said I was bullshitting, I lied, or the guy was joking. I said, whatever. You can twist it any way you want. I'm just telling you what happened to me. Either I'm lying, it never happened, I invented it, or it happened. And if it happened, this is what the guy said to me. You take it, this is how I take it. I'm just reporting it, and I'm demanding an investigation. Nothing was done. They just dismissed it. You're just being a drama queen, you're making up stories, blah, 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 blah. So then in 2000, and then in the end, about a few months later, I discovered by accident in their electronic disclosure system, the Gassoni report, which is made by an American official named Robert Gassoni, which they denied existed. We had heard rumors that it existed for years. And when lawyers demanded to see it, they always said it never existed, it was just a rumor, it never existed. Because we heard it was a report that he had made that the RPF was committing genocide in Rwanda during the war. They said it never existed, so just a myth. Anyway, they gave us access to their electronic disclosure system, which is interesting because there's no index to it. You just find things at random. There's hundreds of thousands of documents on there, hundreds of thousands from all over the world, UN and Rwandan documents, European. You don't know what you're going to. You just go through files randomly and hope you find something. And one day, this is several years of doing this, we found, by chance, this file from the UN Human Rights Committee. And in that file was a letter, and in that letter it said, here's the Gassoni report. So, my God, there it is. It's not all of it. There's like 6 pages, I think it was 20 pages, but they had 6 pages of it, saying that the RPF was committing genocide. Because the guy had come in I think in June or something like that in Rwanda. So from April through when he made the report in November of 1994, he said the RPF is committing ongoing genocide against the Hutus. The UN file said this should be kept, the cover letter said this should be kept secret. So they try to keep it secret, this report. But that wasn't the only thing. As part of his file, there was attached to that letter, to that report, a letter from Paul Kagame to a friend of his named Bagaza in Burundi. Dated August 1994, in which he stated to this Bagaza fellow that I just had a meeting with my big brother, Museveni. Everything's in order. The war has been successful. We've achieved our objectives. Now our goal in the Congo can be completed. In Zaire, actually, he used the word Zaire. And we can be sure of success in Zaire because we have the help of British, Belgian, and American intelligence. And once we've dealt with that, we will also crush Frodibu in Burundi like we crushed the MRND. So like that. There was no mention of genocide, and the word never was mentioned. It became quite clear when you read that letter that the war in Rwanda was the first phase of the wars in this Great Lakes region. It was the first step to start the war against the Congo, break up the Congo for American interests and British and Canadian mining and wherever. So when we found that, I took it to court the next morning, as a good lawyer should do, and stood up and said, I got some evidence here I want to file, and what the hell is that? Well, first of all, we got the Gassoni report, which they had to file, I think, because it was a UN document. But the other one was the letter from oh my God, they stood up, the prosecution immediately when I presented that letter and read it out. There was shock. Prosecution couldn't believe it, nor the judges, nor anybody else. They stood up and said I forged it. I said, I forged it? I mean, come on, yeah, I forged a letter from Kagame. That's amazing. How did I do that? Anyway, so that night I was followed. I was went to a restaurant to have dinner, and the manager came over and said this. See, there's a couple of guys over there. They're following you. They're police, secret police, Tanzanians. And they followed me all night at every place I went. And then I went back the next day in court and said, I'm being followed. And I want it stopped. You're trying to intimidate me. I don't know what they're going to do. But since I raised this letter, I'm being followed now by the Tanzanian secret police. Oh, they did the same thing. Then you're making it up and full of shit and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, the trial goes on, and other things happened we can go on and tell you about. But the trial finally ended in 2009. Then the judgment didn't come out till, well, 2009, 2010. Judgment came out in 2011. General Ndindiliyimana was acquitted on all but 2 counts. They convicted on 2 counts. So I was told by other lawyers, leave it. Because they freed him. They agreed to release him from time served for those 2 counts. And most lawyers said, don't appeal. They'll cross appeal and throw him in jail longer. Be happy with what you got. I said, no. This is bullshit. He's not guilty of these 2 charges. It's nonsense. So I appealed. And sure enough, 3 years later in 2014, we won the appeal. He was finally acquitted of everything. But I was told by the judge, one of the judges, that at the end, after that, I got a message that they had convicted him of those 2 charges because they were pressured by the Americans to convict him of something. They said we wanted to acquit him of everything, but we were pressured to convict him of something. So we did. And in the judgment, they had included a paragraph criticizing Alison DeForge because she had told some lies about Ndindiliyimana. And they also put a paragraph in saying that Mr. Black had always claimed this was a political trial, and we'd always dismissed that. But at the end of the trial, we are convinced that he is correct. This is a political trial, and all the charges were laid for political reasons. So the judge told me that the Americans had pressured them to take those paragraphs out of the judgment, but they refused. So this is the thing that's going on there. There's a lot of intimidation against lots of people. Anyway, I come back to Canada, the trial's over, and everybody's happy. My client's happy. Finally gets to go home a couple of years later. 2014, I get this is in the Toronto Star story, I get and I knew I was threatened. I mean, in 2007, the RPF representative in Arusha came up to me and said, we're going to deal with you if you don't stop what you're doing. This is before the CIA. The RPF actually threatened me. The guy's a big, I forget his name now, he's a big guy. He threatened me physically and demanded our arrest. Me and Philpott, they demanded we be arrested. Then, and thrown in jail with the other prisoners. But anyway, and so I knew I couldn't go to Rwanda. I've never been to Rwanda. I don't dare go there because I don't think I'll end up coming out. So 2014, like I knew this threat was lingering in the air all the time, but okay, we all knew that. 2014, with CSIS, I got a call on my phone from somebody saying it was the Canadian government. I left them out. So I phoned back and they got Canadian government. I said, which branch are you? Who are you? I said, we're CSIS. I said, oh, what do you, okay, what do you want to talk to me about? We want to talk about Rwanda. I said, okay. So I met him in a restaurant, and the man and a woman, they came to see me. They were very polite, very correct. But they said, you know that the Rwandan government wants to kill you. I said, yeah, I've known that for a long time. Well, you're on a hit list. I said, I don't doubt it. Well, hey, we got a list. We got the list. There's your name. And they showed me many other names too. But you're one of the top of the list here. Yeah, I'm not surprised to see that there. And they said, well, I mean, you might be surprised to know that we have information they want to kill you here in Canada. I said, that surprises me. That worries me. Okay. So, okay, thanks for telling me, but what are you going to do to protect me? And they said, nothing. They're not going to do anything. I said, so what am I supposed to do? You told me they might want to kill me here, and you're not going to do anything to help me. Well, we have limited resources, you know. I mean, what can we do? I said, you could do something. I said, what we suggest, Mr. Black, if you want to be safe, perhaps it's better for you to stay quiet. Then you'll be safe. So I took that as a definite threat. I mean, they took it, passed it off as a warning, but I took it as a threat. I said, okay, I get the message. And then a few months later, in March 2015, we got word from one of our colleagues, or Rwandan guys in Montreal, that he had been alerted by somebody inside the regime that there was a four-man hit team in Ottawa who had just arrived to kill us, Philpott, me, Judy River, and David Himbara, sort of a Tutsi fellow who opposing the regime at the current time. And this is the same team that had been kicked out of London back in 2010. They'd been sent in to deal with, eliminate some Hutus there, but Scotland Yard didn't like that, so they kicked them out. And apparently it's the same team, from what we were told. So we'll get together, what are we going to do? So I wrote to the Minister of Public Safety and this and that. Phone ceases, okay, now they're here. So what are you going to do? They just hung up on me. I didn't do anything. Just don't want to deal with it yourself. All right. So somehow the Toronto Star spoke to the fellow in Montreal. He'd make a big fuss about it, and then they found out about the threat to me. So they called me, and I told them. They asked me, what do you think these threats that these people in Montreal are floating are serious? And I said, I don't know. I'm just hearing what you're hearing from them, and I trust them. But the credibility is added to it by the fact that CSIS came to see me just 6 months before to tell me that that's exactly what they wanted to do. And they went, oh, like CSIS came to see you to tell you that. I said, yeah. Oh, wow, that's a big story. So that became a big story. So this is not new. Well, now the fact that he's now come in and given a speech and that people are clapping, it's just disgusting. I mean, what they're really condemning us for is just doing our job. We're just lawyers who went into a trial, did our investigations as we should. We found out what really happened in the war, and who is really to blame for doing all these things. And we're being condemned for doing what we were supposed to do, which the UN required us to do, which the UN said they were going to protect us against any threat for doing that job. And instead of getting kudos for doing our job under difficult circumstances, they still keep threatening us and saying we're genocidal. I mean, you know, negationists or something. We're not. We're just saying this is what we found out happened. We're positivists. We're telling you positively what happened, what the evidence shows. We're not negating anything. So the fact that he came out again and made this demand that we be arrested, I mean, it's just absurd. But it's worrying. It causes anxiety, but sort of an anxiety we've been living with for a long time. So. But if you get into
So,
the war, that's a whole different story. That's a whole different story. But that's the
right.
intimidation aspect of it.
You've definitely been through a lot, and it's clear as day that there was a lot of political motivations for why you went through what you did. Now, with Dr. Bizimana, he mentioned a detailed alleged plan by basically the Habyarimana government from 1990 to 1994 to commit genocide against the Tutsis, which you ended up finding, and actually there was a UN report saying that actually it was the RPF committing genocide from 1990 to 1994.
Yeah, and not only that, there's another very important piece of information. Dr. Alison DeForge, who was the main prosecution witness in all these trials, is the leading expert. She used to work for Africa Rights Watch, Human Rights Watch. She wrote the big book, Leave None to Tell the Tale, in which she also had a chapter on the RPF crimes, devoted to the RPF crimes. In October 2006, in our trial, as a witness for the prosecution, she testified in answer to the prosecution, asking her, so you are then saying to us, Doctor, that there was a conspiracy by the Rwandan government to commit genocide against the Tutsis? And she said, no, there was no such conspiracy. There was no such plan by the Rwandan government. And she said there couldn't be such a plan because the Hutu government, the Rwandan government was not a Hutu government, as everybody keeps alleging. It was a mixed government of Hutu and Tutsi ministers, and some Tutsis held in important ministries. So it's impossible for the government of Rwanda to have planned to commit genocide against Tutsis when it was a mixed Hutu-Tutsi government. And by the way, the army and the gendarmes had Tutsis in those forces. And they never left all the way through the war. They stayed loyal. My General Ndindiliyimana's entire personal escort team were Tutsi officers. And they stayed with him. They were loyal to him all the way through. So that's her testimony, that there was no. So they were shocked, and they said, "Well, what's your theory now about what happened?" She said, "I'm rethinking everything now. That there was no plan by the Rwandan government. There's no plan. There's no genocide because you have to have intent. So what happened? Well, then you got to question what happened. What really happened? This is the prosecution. They're stuck with it. They can't deny their own witnesses' testimony. They're stuck with that testimony in law. That is their official testimony, that there was no plan. But of course, they never tell anybody that's what she testified to. You never hear that. Nobody's ever going to say that. I'm going to tell you that because that's in the transcripts. But nobody else, but the commentators mention it. Nobody. And I can't figure out why they don't, because one of the most striking, shocking things that we heard, she was the main prosecution witness saying there was no conspiracy, no plan. And that was evident from all the evidence anyway. It was quite evident. That's why in 2006, the court decided to recognize the genocide as an accepted fact because they had no evidence of it. So they said, you can't argue there's no genocide anymore. We're just going to say there was. But they never proved, and they had to do that because they had no evidence there was one like that, or that was they described. So there was a lot of things like that came out in the trial. I can give you one example of a massacre that never took place. My General Ndindiliyimana's men were charged with massacring a couple hundred people at a place called Sant'Andre College in Kigali. It's a Catholic school and church combination. He said, my men never did such a thing. I mean, this is ridiculous. We try to protect people everywhere they went, everywhere they were, my men, as much as possible. Anyway, we found that the priests, German and French priests who had been working there were around, and they testified. In fact, they were there throughout the entire period, and there never had been a massacre there at all, ever. And this is the kind of thing you were facing all the time. Accused of a massacre, and oh my God, that guy's terrible. He must have done that. Something must have happened to kill 200 people. They can't invent that, but they did. They just invented a massacre that never took place. In that instance, we proved it. We actually proved there was no massacre there. And that's a lot of things we had to do. It's no good in this trial trying to make the prosecution prove anything, because there was whatever they said was taken as gospel by the judges. It was us who had to prove the opposite. We had to prove the negative. We didn't do this. We didn't do that. That's very difficult. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of, we can go on. I got to go now, but soon. But if you want to talk some other time about what we found out about the war and what really happened in the war day by day and how it went, that's another hour-long discussion. But no, nothing. If people had, sure. People who attended those trials, if they actually read the transcripts, would be shocked to find out what really happened in that war. It's worse, because it's worse actually than people make out. Now, one last thing about his businessman has claimed that there was a plan to wipe out the Tutsis. How come they're not wiped out? They still state, I think, if I'm not wrong, that 300,000 to 400,000 Tutsis survived the genocide. I think that's what they say these days. Well, we had the last census taken in 1991, filed in evidence. There were only 535,000 Tutsis in Rwanda at that time. 45,000 in Kigali. So if 300,000 or 400,000 survived, you're only missing 100,000, maybe, I'm not sure. Who are the other couple of million people? And in Kigali, of the 45,000 Tutsis who were there, we're only missing 6,000. The rest are all accounted for alive. So the skulls you see, Kijosi, who are they? People killed around Kigali. They're not Tutsis. And the Rwandan government, I don't think, has ever done a census since, because they don't. I mean, if they found out who, most Tutsis. I mean, there were Tutsis killed. We had an example of a young man who did kill some Tutsis. Well, he was present when Tutsis were killed in a village in the south, Gitarama somewhere. And he said it happened this way. He said there was no hostilities at all in the south until about the 19th, 21st of April. He said, I had a Tutsi girlfriend, we had Tutsi neighbors, nobody. We thought the war was in the north. It's a thing up north. It wasn't bothering us. But then we woke up one day and all the Tutsis in the village had left their homes. We wondered, what's going on? Where are they? And we found them, they're all down in the church. And they said, they're all down in the church. Why are they down there? So they went down, and people started saying, well, they got secret messages from the RPF, gather in church, we know you are, we're going to wipe out the Hutus. We know where you are, so you'll be safe. People got angry and became suspicious and started throwing stones and catcalling and shouting, and there was stones going back and forth. About 2,000 Tutsis were in this church area. And the local police, a few guys, only 4 or 5 local police came to try and break it up. They couldn't control it. And then some Hutu fighters from another village came walking in with some grenades and some automatic rifles that said, we just left, we just been pushed out of our village. The RPF they're just down the road. They just killed everybody. They just wiped out everybody in the village down the street. They're coming here, and these people did the same thing. These people got here because they were told they're coming. They want you dead. Oh, and then they began shooting at them. And he said, we were shocked. And he said, and then others began joining in. Others, some didn't, some did, some didn't. He says, just mass confusion. And that's what happened. So in that instance, it wasn't a plan. It was just emotions got out of control and people were scared. The Hutus were scared they're going to be wiped out by the RPF, and these other people, the Tutsis, are scared probably also, and all hell broke loose. But what you're talking about is war, the results of war. This is what happens in war. People get scared. People react. And there's also
one last question.
Go ahead. Sure.
One last question just before I go. So the RPF was clearly trying to execute every Hutu that they could on the way in their invasion going southward towards Kigali. This Rwanda plan that they have with the British government, where they basically bring migrants in, is that, do you think that might be a way to cover up their ongoing killings of Hutus in the country right now? Because there have been reports actually in the BBC even about bodies being flown in the river, basically the river bordering Rwanda and Burundi, and
Yeah.
also the fact that the census numbers kind of basically stay constant, but
Right.
there might be an attempt to maybe try to cover up what the government is actually doing to Hutus right now. So I'm just wondering, is
Well, I hadn't thought of that because I assumed that the British had this bizarre plan to ship down
trying to cover up
all the illegal migrants that come into Britain, no matter who they are, Syrians or Russians or Ukrainians or Polish or whoever they're, wherever they're from. If they're only going to deport Africans to Rwanda, then your idea might have some weight to it. I hadn't realized that. I hadn't heard that because I thought it's bizarre because it's illegal. It's illegal what Britain's doing because under the treaties on refugees, if they reject a refugee's claim, they have to deport them to the country they came from, or to a safe country. Or if they don't, if they reject their claim is totally made up, they just deport them back to the country they came from. To ship them to the middle of Africa in a small country like Rwanda, where they don't even speak the language, especially if they're Europeans or Middle Eastern or Iraqis, Afghanis, or whoever, what are they going to do there? How are they going to live there? Who's going to take care of them? How are they going to be treated? Who's going to, what kind of life? This is, I mean, it's just absurd what the British are doing. It's illegal and absurd and very callous and cynical, and actually it's quite horrific what they're, what the idea they have of doing this. I mean, supposing you're some guy from Kabul and you walked all the way, or from Poland, you escaped, you walked all the way across to Britain, and you're going to be sent to Africa. I mean, come on. Yeah, no, it's just crazy. I hadn't heard that, but on the other hand, since the RPF never really lets people know what the true situation is with the numbers of who's who in Rwanda and how many people of each, I mean, because there's a lot of mixed people, you know. I mean, half the people I know are mixed, Tutsi, Hutu fathers, Tutsi mothers, and so on and so forth. It's hard to tell. I mean, it's just all, and many of the prisoners are, you know, very have Tutsis in their families. It's just crazy. This is really a war. It wasn't a civil war. This is a war, an invasion from Uganda, backed by the West for their own interests. And the RPF decided to take advantage of it and take back power, which they've always been wanting to do since the 1960s, since 1959, 60.